The 70s was a handful, and those lucky enough to have witnessed it have many great memories to share. It was packed with cringe shows, very peculiar fashion, risky activities, not to mention a street light that told kids when to go home. Here are things that only those who grew up in the 70s would remember. Back in the sizzling 70s, if you wanted to make a phone call, you didn't tap on a screen. You dialed on a rotary phone. Dialing was a significant chore. You had to spin each number all the way around and then patiently wait for the reverse rotation to complete. If you had a lot of nines on your number, woof, you may as well grab a seat. Now imagine what dropping a few missed calls feels like to the caller. A whole afternoon wasted. Of course, when Saturday rolled around, you forgot all about calling friends and indulged in some Saturday morning cartoons. There was no streaming or DVR, so if you missed it, you missed it. All you needed was a bowl of your favorite sugary cereal. Then you'd plop down on the shag carpet and binge-watch classics like the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, and others. Parents knew not to even bother their kids at these sacred hours. As the day wore on and it got dark, you'd relax under the hypnotic glow of your lava lamp. Watching those slow, gooey blobs float and split was soothing, and it provided a luxurious ambiance. Every teenager wanted a lava lamp, adults too. It was the ultimate mood setter. Now, if you were into fashion, then you must have owned a pair of bell-bottom jeans. The wider the flare, the better. And if it had embroidery, patches, or ultra-faded wash, you looked and felt like a celebrity. The flare swished around when you walked, and you'd match them with platform shoes, especially when it was time to party. Fashion always went along with one thing: music. At that time, there was no better way to store your favorite music than the chunky 8-track tapes. These large cartridges were a rite of passage for youths, and some people kept a treasure box of Grove filled with 8-track tapes. They had everything from Fleetwood Mac to the Bee Gees. The problem was it often skipped to the next track while in the middle of a perfect song. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was unforgettable. On a hot sunny day, you'd cool off with a Tangy Tang, the astronaut drink that made kids feel like they were fueling up for a special space mission. Tang was one of the few NASA-approved drinks. It only takes a scoop in a glass of water to get a tasty drink of orange. Tang was in every lunchbox, kitchen cabinet, and party table. Smoking was allowed everywhere, including indoors. There was little awareness of the harmful effects of smoking, so most establishments allowed smoking indoors for recreation. Whether it was in the office, school, restaurant, or even on a plane, you'd find ashtrays everywhere. There were smoking sections for people in general areas to allow non-smokers a bit of fresh air. Remember a time when phones were uncommon and only a few people had access to a mobile phone? The good thing is, there were payphones on every street, in gas stations, and outside grocery stores. You'd dig around for a quarter and then shove it into the slot. And if it was your last quarter, you hoped you didn't run out of change mid-call. Payphones were convenient, and you didn't have the burden of carrying them around like today's phones. Back then, home furniture was very durable because it was sealed tight under plastic couch covers. They were like furniture in quarantine. They made an unmistakable crinkle sound when you sit. While the plastic couch covers actually protect your furniture, the slip and slide was a discomfort that people weren't very eager to experience. When it came to shopping, the holy grail of consumerism was the Sears catalog. It was a massive magazine with glossy pages packed with the dreams of every household, such as clothes, toys, bikes, appliances, and even homes. If you could name it, Sears had it. Flipping through the pages was like window shopping on Christmas in your pajamas. Every member of the family would circle their heart's desires on the book and hope to get the order someday. Sometimes all you wanted was a clear picture on your TV. In the 70s, the rabbit ear antenna was popular in every home, but reception was often a problem, which meant one thing: grabbing some tinfoil and wrapping it around the antenna. Interestingly, many homes used tinfoil on the TV antenna, and it worked. Rabbit ear antennas would be bent in every direction possible until it catches a clearer signal. It still beats imagination, but the tinfoil somehow improved reception. The gaming world was still in its infancy, and the biggest game of the era was Pong. That little blip bouncing from one side of the screen to the other was absolute magic, and kids could not get enough of it. This was the pinnacle of video gaming, and friends would gather around the console and spend hours challenging one another. How about these glowing fashion accessories that seem to know more about you than you do? Mood rings were popular for one thing. When you put them on, they tell you what mood you're in. Each color it shows represents a certain mood. The swirling colors made it feel like some powerful magic on your finger, even though it was just reacting to your body heat. Some kids even got nicknames when their moods were repetitive. Who else got the name Nervous Steve? Some households had pets, some didn't, but when the Pet Rock hit the market, every single home scrambled to buy one. The Pet Rock was just an actual rock with googly eyes sold in a package and marketed as an exotic pet. It was the silliest fad of the century, but it sold millions nationwide. Who wouldn't want a pet that is low maintenance, doesn't bark, doesn't need food, and keeps you company all the time with its silly artificial eyes? The Pet Rock often complimented its owner's attire when going for a stroll. But speaking of fashion, no fashion accessory defined the 70s like tube socks. These knee-high warmers with brightly colored stripes circling the top were everywhere you went, on the basketball court, gym class, or around the neighborhood. One of the places where you showed off your colorful tube socks was at the roller rink. The rainbow-lit Disco Palace was one of the best places to hang out with friends and to enjoy a bit of roller skating to loud music. You were always greeted by the sparkle of the mirror ball, the delicious scent of popcorn, and the screeching of skates. First-timers would struggle to keep their balance, while pros glided like they were born with wheels on their foot. The real daredevils were kids on bikes. Every kid in the 70s knew that owning a bike was cool, but owning one with a banana seat meant you were the classiest person in the neighborhood. Banana seats were long and curved with high-rise handlebars. It wasn't just a bike, it was a whole new experience, and kids would beg to take turns on this speedster. No helmet, of course. How else would they feel the wind in their hair? And speaking of safety, the lack of it, some cars in the 70s came with no seatbelts. The station wagon was one of the most iconic cars of the era. It had padded bench seats and was nothing short of comfortable, but every single trip was a big risk. With very little awareness of road safety and the possibilities of a fatal accident, most people just enjoyed their ride with the radio blaring.
It's a beautiful morning and it's gonna be a beautiful day.
After a long day, the whole family gathered around the TV to catch up on America's favorite sitcom, The Brady Bunch. The dysfunctional family of Greg, Marcia, Peter, Jan, Bobby, Cindy, and, of course, Alice served up life lessons dipped in comedy. Once you saw those smiley faces in blue squares, you knew you were in for a good time. One of the best places for screen time was the drive-in theater. It was the perfect place to go on dates or catch a new movie release. Cars would drive into a park with a giant screen under the stars, and people would watch movies while nibbling on a bucket of popcorn and some drinks. Whether it was Jaws, Star Wars, or any other blockbuster, it was always a fun time with family and friends. Back at school, education had its cinematic flair thanks to slide projectors in classrooms. That familiar click, followed by slightly crooked images on the pull-down screen, was absolutely classic. Teachers would dim the lights as a long lesson on history began projecting. Occasionally, the slides would jam and teachers would begin maintenance, usually a few slaps to the side of the machine. One of the classroom treasures was the scratch and sniff stickers, tiny scented circles of joy that you earned in class for good behavior or good grades. The reward was a nice or delicious scent sticker that made kids happy. The scents could be grape, popcorn, pizza, or anything else, and kids would hoard them in their sticker books. The scent was pure happiness while it lasted. As a kid, there were many toys to obsess over. One of them was the indestructible, super stretchy hero of childhood, Stretch Armstrong. You could pull his arms, twist his legs, and even tie him in knots, and somehow he'd go right back to normal. He was part action figure, part science experiment. If you got one for Christmas, you instantly became the coolest kid in school. Playing vinyl records was the ritual of the 70s. Most homes had a turntable as vinyl records were the best music storage mechanism at that time. The thin, flat vinyl was neatly stored in sleeves to prevent dust and stacked side by side to avoid clutter. Whether it was Earth, Wind and Fire, the Bee Gees, or Jackson 5, once you drop the needle on the record, first comes the crackle, and then the smoothest melody you ever heard. Remember back in school when the film strip beeps would jolt kindergartners out of sleep while the projector played a narrated story. The static image accompanied by a voiceover on a cassette often got the kids a little sleepy, and then beep! That's when the slide changes. The recurring beeps did become a bit annoying, but those were some of the most memorable days. Lunchtime in school was the highlight of the day. You couldn't wait to see what the menu of the day would be. You'd grab a school lunch tray designed to hold sections for each meal class. The classic trays were made of plastic to avoid being used as weapons, but food fights were sometimes inevitable. Oftentimes you got a scoop of mashed potatoes, a slice of meat, some Jell-O, and if you got a cold carton of chocolate milk, then it was a good day. As visual aids in classrooms improved, overhead projectors became more common. With its hum, its giant fan, and those transparent sheets written in marker, the projector was the biggest classroom tech of that era. It certainly made learning a lot more fun. Now, after school was when things got really fun. Kids would engage in prank phone calls to kill time and stir up mischief. They'd call strangers on the rotary phone, asking silly questions. They would giggle and then cut the call before the stranger got a chance to reply. Classic fun, at least until the phone bill arrived. If you got hungry, there was always a piece of white bread sandwich. Maybe white bread toast, or perhaps white bread and butter. White bread, everything. No one was counting carbs, and whole grain was something only a hippie cared about. It was white bread or nothing. Another real pastime activity was playing with G.I. Joe dolls. The movie was so spectacular that kids lost their minds over the tiny action figures. The plastic heroes with realistic gears were the best Christmas gift. Kids adored the kung fu grip and the fuzzy painted-on hair. The storyline never ends. G.I. Joe toys parachuting from tree houses, and Barbie being saved from a ridiculous amount of dangers. You were only limited by your imagination. TV was family time, and what other way to bond than our Happy Days obsession? The classic cast of Richie, Potsy, Ralph, Malph, and everyone's favorite, the Fonz, was an all-time American favorite. Fonzie's "A" always lit up the place as he walked in with his macho leather jacket and slick hair. The theme song was as popular as the national anthem. What about The Gong Show, a chaotic blend of talent, cringe, and comedy? It was a game show that was often great, but sometimes hard to watch, but surprisingly entertaining. Whenever the judges couldn't take it anymore, they struck the big brass circular gong and sent the performer off stage. It was unpredictable and just very 70s. Every once in a while, kids would get excited at the shrill blast of those fire drills and sirens. One minute you are in class trying to survive a pop quiz, and the next you are lining up single file in the hallway and heading for the emergency exit. These preparations were deemed necessary in case of a fire, which could happen any time. It often disrupted studies and other activities, but for some reason, kids absolutely loved the chaos. In the 70s, you didn't need to spend money buying music records. There was a solution to that. Taping songs off the radio was pretty popular and easy. Once you had a cassette tape, you placed it inside a recorder while listening to the radio and then waited for your favorite song to come on air. All you had to do was press record. Many had their own taped collection with their favorite songs. The recording process required a bit of luck. If the DJ talked over the song, then you had to stop the recording and try another day. Long before TV remotes were created, there were TV dials. Yes, you had to stand up from your seat every time to change the channel on your TV dials. Since there was no remote, you had to know what every button and knob on your TV did. There were a handful of channels available, and fine-tuning UHF was always a headache. But once you found your favorite show, you just watched that channel all day. How about those streetlight curfews? Every kid knew that when the streetlights flickered, playtime was over and it was time to go home. It was a technology that acted almost as a chaperone to let kids know that it was time for bed. On those long summer afternoons, nothing hits the spot like drinking straight from the hose as a kid. There were no water filters or bottles, and the thirst certainly couldn't wait. The first sip was often hot, and kids learned the hard way not to take a few at least for a few seconds to allow the stored hot water run off. Entertainment was often as simple as playing with a coil of metal or plastic called a slinky. It always starts out flowing gracefully down the steps like a walking spaghetti, but nothing was as frustrating as getting tangled in your slinky after a bad move. You'd spend hours trying to untangle it. Roller skating to disco music sounding from a boombox was an activity that brought youths together. It was a form of rebellion that became part of a culture, and if you wanted to be cool, you had to join the daredevil roller skaters in parks. The disco music was often loud and accompanied with smoking and drinking. The real inspiration of the 70s was Evel Knievel, the motorcycle stuntman that jumped over cars, canyons, fountains, and a line of buses. People watched Evel Knievel's stunts on TV with bated breath as he survived every insane jump. He inspired a generation, making kids believe that humans could fly. Remember the iconic Charlie's Angels posters, the glossy aesthetic that featured Farrah Fawcett's feathered hair. This treasure was on the wall in every home. Every girl wanted to be like the Angels, and Farrah Fawcett's hair brought a hot new trend in hairstyling. To keep up with all the dreamy faces of the decade, from musicians to actors and artistes, you had to have a copy of the Tiger Beat magazine. This pop culture publication was for tweens, loaded with glossy images of sizzling hot celebrities such as the Hardy Boys, Leif Garrett, and Sean Cassidy. The pages often ended up as wallpaper decoration to impress your visitors. Taking pictures in the 70s required a whole lot of patience. Taking the snapshots with your camera was only the beginning. You had to drop off the roll of film at the developer's store and come back hours or days later to get your copies. Waiting for the film to develop was long and filled with suspense, but thanks to technology, it's become a forgotten memory. Back home, many households still used black and white TVs, especially in certain areas far from the big cities. While black and white TVs were archaic, they still had their charm. You just had to occasionally adjust those rabbit ear antennas to cut through the static. The first real lessons you learned in school was the cursive lessons, how to loop that perfect capital Q and G, as well as other alphabets. Teachers would move around like drilling sergeants, rewarding those with perfect penmanship and scolding those with poor practical skills. When it was time for theoretical classes, projectors were often used. Who could forget the beeps and repetitive clicks to change the slide on the film strip? The class was silent. Lights dim. The only noise was the school projectors clicking, sadly reminding you that you were at school and not the cinema. Another technology that was pretty much a lifesaver to music lovers was cassette recorders. These contraptions recorded music from the radio to the cassettes and played the music on the cassettes as well. Another interesting trick, you could also record yourself speaking or use it to conduct audio interviews. Owning a cassette recorder was an absolute necessity. The 70s WW were defined by posters and wallpapers. It was a time where you hung up whatever you loved on the walls of your home, your school, anywhere except the office. Wall posters were everywhere, and most importantly, the posters often defined your personality. The walls were an empty canvas, and your choice of posters was the paint. If you were a kid in the 70s, nothing shattered Saturday morning vibes like your favorite cartoons interrupted by emergency broadcasts. One minute you are watching Bugs Bunny ruin Elmer Fudd. The next, you are watching some test emergency broadcast. But with a little patience and some nerve-calming cereal, Bugs Bunny will return with all its antics. Which of these things do you remember growing up? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more amazing trips down memory lane.